Hello, beautiful visionary tribe. This is Lorna Liana for another episode of Entheo Nation, and I'm very happy to have as our guest today Philippe Lewis, who is a sex and intimacy coach, certified sexological bodyworker. Ooh, I didn't know that those certifications existed. He's also a trained Somatica practitioner and an epic event producer, and I will definitely say yes to that. I've been to a number of Philippe's epic events. So for the past 18 years, he has been exploring relationships, intimacy, sensuality, and sexuality with individuals and communities through teaching, writing, coaching, and sexy events, with the goal of growing men and women into better lovers and better humans. He's a father, lover, partner, husband, teacher, producer, writer, and a social artist, social engineer, coach, counselor, and much, much more. Wow. Okay. So I can say that indeed his love for life is as polyamorous as his love and his sex life. So thank you so much for joining us today, Philippe. I'm really glad to have you with us.
Hey Lorna, yeah, good to see you again.
I know it's been a while, so I'd love to get caught up on, who you are and, what exactly got you to this very interesting profession that you've created for yourself. Because I don't know where it was that I ever saw a job posting on Craigslist for certified sexological body worker and sex coach.
Wow, where do we start? That's always an interesting question. When I was born, when my parents met.
Okay, so I remember when you
high
and I first
school.
met, you were working in like a high-tech company.
Right. Yeah.
And then since then, you liberated yourself from your cubicle job and you just created a purposeful, passionate, like super fun lifestyle and business for yourself. And that is amazing.
Yeah, I think. Well, so I'm still gonna have to pick. I mean, working for a high-tech company, that was a good chunk of time. It was about 10 years. So I'm trying to think what would have been
You
like an inception moment.
Exactly. What caused you to take the leap and say, you know what, I can actually make a living doing what I love?
Well, okay. Whew. Again, still, there's like it's been such a. So let me take a moment and. I think if I go back, there's one inception moment that really connects a lot of this together. It was a moment about 12 or 14 years ago when I asked myself, so what is it that I really love? What is it that really jazzes me up and drives me? And it's going to sound very much like a guy thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. And what drove me at the time was women, was my engagement with women and the way that they were responding to my offerings, the way they were responding to my moves, the way they were responding to my conversation. And some of it was probably hormone fueled in some way. Some of it was definitely fueled by having been a nerd all of high school. That's why I said high school a minute ago. I was like, if you ever seen the Revenge of the Nerd movie, that was me. That was totally me in high school. In fact, first year of high school, I had all my books for all 6 periods, even after lunch, with me with a big thing of pencils and pens, the big little pouch full of pens and pencils and erasers. And I remember my first day, like some little bully, some tiny little bully guy who knows a lot of martial arts just decided to just kind of toss my books. And it was really like the scene. Here I am. I just showed up. I'm so excited. I love science. I love astronomy. I love growing plants. I mean, total nerd thing. And there are my books all over the stairs, even as you would see in the beginning scene of a movie. And that's that's not where it got started, but that's just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. And then a few years later, going through my teens, not really knowing how to engage. I could see there was this thing called being cool and being socially intelligent and knowing what to say, and the girls approaching some guys but not me. And then eventually I went to college to to do computer science because I really loved that stuff, and my dad's an engineer, and I just followed in his footsteps in some ways. And then after college, being sent to California for training, and I ended up hooking up with a girl in my class, which is I'd never done, but it's like I hadn't had very many experiences, and just kind of feeling so good in California that I decided to move. And then shortly after that, a year or two after that, I went to Burning Man for the first time, which totally shifted my perspective on everything.
What year was that?
So it's like one thing after another. Burning Man, then California, then Burning Man. And then there was a point where I realized I did not want to be in a cubicle for the rest of my life. And so I started asking myself, what is it that I want to do? What is it that really, again, back to the same question, what jazzes me up? What really gets my blood flowing? And I realized that it was engaging with women. And so from that point, I started getting really curious. And at that time, shortly after Burning Man, I joined a troupe called Mystic Family Circus.
I remember that, yeah. So what year was that when you first went to Burning Man?
So 98 was my first time at
Burning Man.
99 was when I joined Mystic Family Circus.
I loved Mystic Family Circus.
Our very first ritual performance. And so there I was a street performer doing characters. I would build my characters by just walk into an event or a party or a festival and just finding people to engage with. And I realized this was the perfect place to engage with women. And also men too, but women were way more attractive and way more attractive to me. So I just kind of naturally went in that direction. And the practice of being, sort of exploring who I can be in the presence of another person, especially a woman, kind of gave me the space to practice and discover myself in that area, and also to get curious because I had an unending number of opportunities to engage and see what happens. So
when did you actually quit your day job?
That's probably in 2001, 2002. That was around a time where the company I was working for was Siebel Systems, and they were just firing a whole bunch of people. And I realized, wow, this is my chance. So they said, how about you add me to the list? They fired half the workforce, and to this day, I'll never know if I was already on the list or not on the list.
You volunteered, and then you became fun employed.
That's right. And from that point, I had a little bit of stock options. I started money from stock options saved, and so that helped me sort of carry me forward for a couple of years as I developed other skills, such as making chocolates. And I wasn't doing coaching yet. I did a counseling training called Interchange, which is really popular now, Interchange counseling training. And you could Google that. My friend Steve Behrman teaches that. That was sort of the beginning part because I'd been with this woman for about 6 years. I told her I wanted to explore polyamory, open relationship. I had no clue what that was all about. I just knew I wanted to explore that. And our relationship ended because she wasn't up for that. And that was around the time where I started doing the Interchange counseling training. And that kind of gave me a basis not only to do my own work, my own personal work, but also to be able to do a similar kind of work with other people. And that allowed me to pursue my curiosity about people and relationships and sensuality and sexuality. And that was around the same time that I started producing events at the time, which were called Mystic Temple of Bliss, which are essentially some version of a sexy or play party. And again, more space for me to explore, engage, and that space allowed me to become much better and better and better over the years at engaging with women.
Okay, so it seems like, your primary work right now is oriented around supporting men and women to become better lovers. What does that look like?
Well, because I've been through it, it looks like, well, at least my version of it looks like, well, you're in the presence of somebody that you really love, you really enjoy, and there's all these blocks that kind of stand in your way. You might be thinking, oh, I feel really triggered about what this person said or what they did, and I know if I just knew what to think, or if I just had a different perspective, or if I just had somebody to support me, I could walk through it like it's a walk in the park, but I don't have that, and so I'm stuck. I just don't know what to do and what to say or how to react, or I'm already reactive and I don't know where to go from there. and and that happens in intimate relationships all the time. And very, very early on in my development, I realized there was a part of me that could just kind of sit there and thinking, wow, if I could just step out of this, like it was nothing, then I would definitely be a much happier person. And so that's what I've been doing with people all over all over my life, my friends and loved ones or other and clients who are coming up to me. I'm supporting them and shifting their perspective, having somebody to love them and nurture them through these difficult times or these places that are more reactive until they're able to grow into something that's a little bit more self-confident, that is just more confident, and has a better sense of what's going on inside themselves and inside other people.
So do you work with people primarily in a coaching or mentoring type of role, or is some of the work that you do hands-on?
Oh yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. So it spans a range. I mean, I have some clients who are perfectly satisfied with just like the conversation, and that's where I came from originally. I just love conversations, and it just so happens that my primary language of love, or one of the primary two, is words of affirmation, which to me occurs as communication. And when I'm in communication with someone, whether it's in touch or in words primarily, I feel most at ease and I feel most gotten. And so some people just like words. They just like to talk, and it's perfectly fine for them. Some people, on the other hand, like a little hands-on, or to just tell them, like, do this, and do that, and without actually doing it in their body, they just don't know what it feels like. So that's where sexological bodywork comes in. And sexological bodywork is essentially hands-on sex education. So I teach people how to have better orgasms by actually showing them on their body. So they get to drive, they get to decide what they're up for, and I get to sort of show them the territory a little bit. And a perfect example of that is a lot of women, if you're using your fingers on them, or if they're using their own fingers on themselves, if they don't do it very often, they don't exactly know they know where they're touching because they're doing it, but if somebody else is doing it, they can't quite tell. So they know that some things feel good. Like I had a client recently who came to me and she said, I've heard of the cervical orgasm, and a lot of women have told me about it, and I want to experience it. And I know that when some guys are inside of me, that it feels really good, and it feels like much better than other times. But I have no idea what they're doing, and I have no idea why their cock is in this particular way doing it for me or not. So what we did is we had a session where we explored the inside of her vagina with my fingers, of course with gloves. I have clothes on. It's with gloves. We've decided what the boundary is. So it's all done in a way that basically it's about serving her. I have no desire other than being in full service of what feels good to her, and she has to be in a space that's receptive. And so we explored the inside of her vagina and found different areas that felt much better. And we strongly believe that we found that cervical spot, what we call the deep spot. So that's just an example. And that's called mapping. So mapping is to explore the inside, find out what feels good. And also I would tell her exactly how my fingers were and how deep. So if she were with a lover, she could actually request the same things.
That is brilliant, actually, because, first of all, it's so difficult for a person to map themselves, because like the reach of your hands and like the angles, like you just can't, it's not going to be the same as with your lover. And then secondly, to be able to figure out where those places are and then communicate that to a future lover is a skill that, we don't get taught this in school.
No.
We don't get taught this by our parents.
Can you imagine how radical that would be? High school kids practicing with each other. That's like heresy right there. But
it's like part of like an essential part of sexual education. Like, okay, not only should you learn how to prevent pregnancy, but you should learn how to ask for, better pleasuring for your lover. Could you imagine?
Well, that's because that would only work if you were in a society that declares sex as a pleasurable thing. And it doesn't matter that the sex industry is the biggest industry, way beyond the car industry and a bunch of other ones put together. But to actually admit that people have sex for pleasure would mean that we have to that teaching it actually makes perfect sense. it totally goes right up against the education, sort of the education we got from the Puritans way back when as a culture.
I know. Sometimes I wonder, just, what's going on in the mainstream? I don't get it. I don't get it. But, okay. So, when you work with clients, then, when you work with the men and the women who are your clients, what are the most important areas of development or their most powerful transformations after they work with you? What do they get?
Okay, well, for women, a lot of the areas are about knowing they can have their own desires, and those desires are valid, and knowing that that's possible. Because a lot of women, and culturally, that's often promoted is that women are focused more on what pleases their man, and to actually start focusing on themselves and knowing that that's a valid thing to experience and to have. That can be a big breakthrough. Now, after knowing that it's possible to have your own desires, the next step is to discover what these desires are, and it's not always obvious. So the mapping is one example to knowing what are desires and also what feels good, especially in the body. But I would say women have a pretty good sense of what feels good emotionally, but not necessarily what feels good as much what feels good in the body. And you're probably a fairly awakened woman, and so you've done a lot of exploration that's done consciously. But when you're with a lover and all they want is to fuck or make love, but they just want to play, they don't want to slow down and experiment and try different things, then that doesn't open up the space very much to find out, well, what else do I like? What else do I want? What else might I want, even though it sounds a little strange at first? So to actually have that space is something that to actually know that this space is a valid space to be, and to be able to learn in that experimental space, I think is really key for women.
Wow, that's so interesting, because it's something that I actually only recently discovered. And it was something that kind of seemed like the norm for so long. And then I was like, wait a second, there's something really odd with the fact that if you look at adult films or videos, that most of it's focused on the male orgasm.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, and so then it's then it kind of subliminally then, has a really powerful effect on having women focus on the male orgasm. And the men, the lovers that they're with, focus on their orgasm, So it's really great to be able to empower women in this way to get in touch with the validity of our desires, and then of course be able to communicate them in a way that enhances, I think, the overall sexiness of the experience, rather than kind of creates a emasculating effect, which would not be good for your lovemaking session.
Perspective, adding to what you're saying is, well, if we look at women, what are the different areas? I call them the six intelligences. So so there's mind, body, spirit, heart, spirituality, and social. So those are the six intelligences, or erotic. And erotic intelligence. So if we look at women, the areas where I often see where they could be more intelligent is erotically, sometimes somatically, which is to know their body, to know what feels good, erotically in terms of allowing their inner animal to come out and to be able to drive an experience without them feeling guilty about it. So those are some of the areas, but emotionally women are often very intelligent because they've had a lot of practice. Now if we turn the tables and we look at men, then men are often not so emotionally intelligent. So a lot of the training that I do with men is about being more emotionally sensitive, and also being sensitive to what's going on in the other person in front of them. So it could be at an emotional level, but also be at all sorts of level. What's going on in this woman's body? How is her body reacting to your touch? So that's about being more somatically intelligent as well. And but I think one way that men tend to be intelligent, if not very simple and primitive, it's erotically. Men could most likely just fuck until tomorrow and not even think twice. The problem is if that comes into a relationship without any sort of emotional sensitivity, then it just feels like they just want, and they're not able to pace themselves with the woman in order to awaken her own inner animal, or her own eroticism.
That's really fascinating. So then if you were to work with couples, like both a man and a woman, then how would you work with them?
Well, it depends. I mean, whatever I spoke to right now, that's just sort of a rule of thumb. There are, I just had a woman who just contacted me online, and just the other day, and she said, I'm a really awakened, very erotic woman, and my man is much more, in other words, he is much more feminine, and he is much more affectionate and cuddly, and he doesn't satisfy me sexually. So that's just an example of where the rule of thumb doesn't apply. Or you can use the rule of thumb, but you always have to look at each individual and see what's really going on between them. So what I do with couples is I just, we're in a conversation about like, well, what's going on? What's missing? What would you like? What is it that if you had it, that you would feel much more fulfilled? You would feel much more yourself. Because the main issues in relationship is that, well, you've got two beings, and they each have their own values, and they each have their own expression of values. And it's when these things are not quite in sync that people have conflicts. If you had the same values and the same expression of values as the next person, you would just get along all the time, because whatever you want, they would want, or they would want it in a similar way, or they would want to express it in a similar way. So what I look for is the discrepancies between the values, or even if they have the same values, like they say, well, I want honesty, and the other person says, I want honesty too. And I say, okay, well, how is it that you're not able to find each other in that similarity? And one person says, well, for me, honesty means you go out and you come back and tell me everything. The other person says, well, for me, honesty is I get to ask you questions and you get to answer them truthfully. And it's not the same thing.
That is so fascinating, actually, because it's so easy to, like, especially in the beginning of a relationship, to think, oh, wow, we've got like all these, similar interests and values and all that. And you discover that, the difference is there's a lot of devils in the details. So I recall in my last, relationship, we both, believe in community. But my idea of what community looks like is very different from what his idea of community looked like. And so then we had this major conflict because I didn't want to, join the community that he was offering me, because that was not the community that I felt, safe in, for example.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's really interesting. So what do you think the most important thing is for anyone in a relationship to remember if they want the relationship to work out so that it is a mutually fulfilling, empowering, juicy, positive experience, living experience?
Well, I would mention two things that kind of go hand in hand, if I may.
Okay.
You said what's the most, and I'm like, oh, this is hard. On top of like recognizing values and the expression of values, I would say first of all is to realize that relationship that is to approach relationship as an opportunity for growth. You're in a relationship in order to grow. And the second one is whatever happens, it's all part of the grand experiment. There is no what did they do that in A/B in website design? Like there's the A/B testing. Half the people go to the one website look and feel, and the other people go to the other site with a different look and feel, and then you get a sense of what works and what doesn't work. Well, in your relationship with somebody, you only have one person to test with. There's no A/B testing with this person. You either do it one way or you do it another way, and you see how they react. And it might be in a different mood. There might be something else going on. And so to be in a relationship means to always be experimenting and always trying to figure out what works best, what doesn't work as well. And there's no. I mean, you can do do-overs, but essentially you're experimenting live with this person all the time. It's like there's just one take. There's not 5 takes.
So then how would you use relationship as a crucible for spiritual growth? So when I see relationship, I agree. Like relationship is a great opportunity for growing. Now, you can grow and then it gets uncomfortable and you stop and you move on to the next person. Or you can decide to like stay in the fire and like let those challenges forge you and, where you emerge into a more magnificent version of yourself, or you crash and burn. So, so like, how do you know, like, how do you use it and like as a crucible for spiritual growth? And how do you know when it's time to, if you need to just sit in the fire some more because it's going to make you a better person, or whether it's time to like, flit on to the next person and the next person and the next person, where, if you keep doing that, the same issues are going to keep emerging just with different names and faces because you haven't actually worked on those issues.
Well, this is like the age-old question. When is it time to break up? It's generally such a difficult question. There's like if you think of the hero's journey and how the hero goes through all these challenges and then faces the abyss and gets through the abyss. In hero's journey sections of story, that when the hero faces the abyss, that's when they think they're gonna die. You see this in all movies where there's a hero. They think they're gonna die. They think they're gonna be destroyed, and then something inside rises up to get them to go one step further, and then they vanquish the dragon. They get past that difficult thing. Well, so here's the thing. Everybody who leaves a relationship when things getting a little too hot or too crazy or too hard, they will never know if they had stayed one more step, if they would have like gone through it. So that's one thing. Like you can never quite tell. What you have to be able to discover for yourself is what's your ability to be, what's your degree of resilience. Because what happens is if you keep on meeting the same fire every day, all the time, it could erode you over a long period of time. And then you sort of like forget, you realize you're not who you were before. That happens in situations. Or you become something else. You become a different person. It kind of shifts your compass. You don't really know who you are anymore. So situations where there's trauma or abuse in a relationship, it works like that. Like you 6 months later or a year later or 5 years later, you talk to a friend and your friend says, "You're not the person I remember. You're much darker. You're not as happy." And that's when you realize, wow, this relationship has totally shifted me in a way that's not me, or that's not who I want to be. And then you can get the hell out. But there's also a way that a relationship can push you towards growth. So then we get into the conversation of like, what are your boundaries? What are your soft boundaries and what's your hard boundaries? So I'll give you a quick rundown. The soft boundaries are the things you can push up against, and when you push up against them, it forces you to grow. But you also have to have a certain pace, because if you do it all the time, it might actually damage you over time. So same thing for working out. If you're working out every day and you don't give yourself a chance to heal, then you won't be, or you don't get a chance to recover, I'd rather say, then you'll always be sore, and at some point it might actually affect your health. But then there's a point where past the pushing of soft boundary, you reach what's called a hard boundary. And when you reach that hard boundary, if you go past it, it will hurt you in some way. And you have to have a space for healing from that, like real healing, where you have to process, you have to understand what happened, you have to understand how, and integrate it in a way that can take a long time. So what I'm saying is that the point where it's time to get away from the relationship is when you realize that it's no longer just a soft boundary that fosters growth, but it crosses over it crosses over past the hard boundary. And what does that look? Well, it could look like you're engaging with somebody who doesn't have the same values. Usually that's what it means. Basically, you're engaging with someone who has values that are so radically different than yours, or their sense of reality is so different than yours that it actually either erodes you slowly or impacts you tremendously, and you can't see straight anymore. Your own sense of values, your own sense of self, your own sense of boundaries is destroyed either quickly or slowly.
Wow, that was just such wisdom there. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm gonna mull that one over for a bit too.
Wine and listen to that again.
Exactly. Wow.
It was pretty packed. Sorry.
No, it was great. It was perfect. Okay, so
Oh yeah, one more thing I want to add. The biggest deal around this is you have to know what's okay for you. You have to know where your soft boundaries are, when your hard boundaries are. That's the hard work. That's the hardest work, because you're discovering boundaries are not something that you just know. I mean, some people think they just know, but mainly these are things that you test against. So, for example, for weights, well, how do I know how much I can bench press one time? Well, there's only one way I can find out, is to actually go about and do it. So I would try, 100 pounds. Okay, I can do that. Okay, no, but then can I do 200 pounds? Can I do it now, or can I do it in a day? Okay, so I can try both. But when you're in a relationship, you don't necessarily have that opportunity. And so you get pushed in all these different ways. And then sometimes you feel like it was a soft boundary, like, okay, I'm growing, I'm learning. And then you realize, wow, I'm not recovering from this. And that's how you know that it went over from a soft boundary area to a more like a transgression, more like a path crossing into the hard boundary. And that's how you know. You can only know if you're getting hurt. So being in a relationship is a cauldron, but it's also risky.
I agree completely, because I can say, like, from my own personal perspective, I am an entrepreneur and a self-employed individual. So if I'm involved in a relationship that's really emotionally disastrous and draining a lot of my energy, that has very real effects and a very real impact on my ability to generate income and pay my own bills. So, relationships can be risky. And for me, maybe that does limit the extent of my, intimate relationships, but I do kind of have a bit of a, kind of like a gauge, so to speak. So if the relationship is starting to dip into net negative, then it's like, no, I can't, do that, because I have to protect my business, my livelihood, my clients. That is my work. My body of work that I'm creating in the world is probably it is my primary priority, because it's also how I feed myself. So,
But it feeds you in different ways too. It feeds you emotionally, it feeds you energetically too, not just how you pay the rent and how you get food on the table.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have the same safety net as, being an employee does. Whereas, like, you can have a really bad day or a really bad week or month, but you have your job, and basically your employer is absorbing the cost of your, lack of productivity during that difficult time, and like you're clocking a paycheck, and if you're checked out or like, disappearing on like, longer and longer breaks because you're on the phone arguing with your, partner, like you can get away with that. But like, if you're self-employed, that, it's going to have a real impact on you. So yeah, absolutely. So I want to wrap up this really, fascinating conversation, because we're at the end of our segment. I'd love to ask you, two questions. So first is, we've talked a lot about relationships and like men and women, and how to, try to, have relationships that are successful and work and are fulfilling. What do you think are the main differences between what a man wants and what a woman wants in love relationships? Because I see like getting that right is a key to the longevity and fulfillment of a love relationship. So what are your thoughts?
It's interesting you asked for that, because I just posted a blog post on my website called Graceful Connections, the 5 keys to what women want. So that's a good start.
Okay.
So I would say that women mainly, and it's interesting, because what I'm going to say is something that applies more to people, and it's just a matter of what it looks like. So I'll in my blog post, I say essentially women want to be gotten. Women want to be held, accepted, loved, supported, but in a way they just want to be held or gotten. They want it. they want to know that somebody else knows who they are so well that they feel held. So that's what all my experience and all my research and all my personal experiences with lovers have led me to believe and led me to see. And then the flip side of that is I think men want that too. And what that looks like really is dependent on their ability to perceive it. So I would state that men are more likely to want that in a sexual way, although men are very emotionally intelligent. Women are very emotionally intelligent, because men are not so much. They can't necessarily receive being held in an emotional way, but they can receive being held in a sexual way a lot more. And then women, on the other hand, would want to be received in an emotional way, because they can receive that really well. They can perceive that and see that somebody is there for them in this particular way much more easily, because they're much more intelligent in those areas. So I think even though men are as emotional as anybody else, I think they're not as intelligent around it. Meaning that even if an emotion arises, they're not as able. And I say this again as a rule of thumb, will not apply to all men. And in fact, if it doesn't apply to you, awesome, because that means you're a little bit more emotionally intelligent than most men. But I'd say everybody feels. And it's a matter of somebody else getting how we feel. And I'm not just talking about feeling emotionally, but also feeling with our mind, feeling with our body, feeling with our inner animal, feeling spiritually. If somebody can approach you as a person and feel you in all these different ways, then you will feel fully gotten. And if you feel fully gotten, then you feel connected. And if you feel connected, then you feel at one with this person, and you feel like you found your soulmate. And I think this applies to both people. It just looks different because of their capacity to receive that love and to express it too.
Oh, so you brought up a really interesting term that I've been trying to really grapple with too. So soulmate. So what are some of the characteristics of a soulmate relationship? And do you think it's something that already pre-exists? So like you meet someone and you really resonate with them and you're like, wow, that person's my soulmate, versus, you meet somebody, you're like, oh, he seems kind of nice, and like get to know him better. And and then eventually it's like, I think this person's my soulmate after like maybe 2-5 years of working on it. What's your take on what the elusive soulmate is, and how to make a soulmate relationship work?
You're not asking me the easiest question today.
But I want to know.
I want to know. Well, I'll give you my best shot.
Okay.
So, soulmates, characteristics of soulmates. I'll put common values, similar expression of values, not necessarily the same. Growth that feels like it's at a right pace. Let's see, what else would I put in there? A similarity of movement in energetic movement, which means like, wherever you're at and wherever they're at is in a similar place. So you're dancing together and it feels like you're dancing in the same dance and to the same music. Let's see, soulmates, that deep connection, like a deep connection that doesn't get broken up all the time. And also somebody who can get you and the same way that you can get them. And ultimately we get down to like a particular synergy that feels growthful, that makes you feel more alive, which also means but generally also means that it's pushing you in a way that's causing you to grow, but it's pushing you to grow in a way that feels right, that feels it's the right pace, that takes into account where you're at, that takes into account what's too scary, where you don't want to go, that takes into account what you desire, for whatever reason you desire these things. So when you have two people doing that together in this really beautiful and deep way, then you can call that being soulmates, or at least in my interpretation of it. At the same time, you have to understand that when you first meet somebody, there's a ton of chemicals that are running in your body, and you're sort of on drugs for a little while. And those kinds of drugs are the drugs that make you feel like you're even more connected, and actually causes you to be even more flexible at the beginning with a total stranger, so that you connect more deeply. So a lot of people will express love in all 5 love languages for the first few weeks or months, and it's the romantic phase of the relationship, where you're basically building up all these positive experiences so that when you start doing the real growth, it doesn't come from left field. It's a gradual process of like perceiving this person as like almost all fantasy and a little bit of reality, and that reality grows, and the fantasy, gets smaller and smaller, and you're starting to really see the person, and you're starting to really see the diversity and the richness of this person, not just in the common experiences you built together, but also you start to see more deeply in their soul. And that's a whole new type of intimacy compared to I feel close to this person versus I can see deep into their soul. But it all contributes together to create this graceful dance. And that if you stick with it and you're willing to learn, you will go into that deeper dance. And you go talk to anybody who's been together for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, grandparents who are still together, parents who are still together, and ask them, like, is being a soulmate all it's cracked up to be? And they'll give you all sorts of different answers. But the main thing is they're still there, still doing the work. Even if it's in a light way, even if they're just hanging out together day in, day out. Yeah, they may not be in this full-on growthful trajectory, but they're still together and they're still doing it. So that can be very meaningful for some people. And so some people, it's all about growing fast.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was very juicy information. Thank you so much for your time here with us today. How can we best stay in touch with you, Philippe?
Okay, you go to my website, exquisitelover.com, and it's both for men and women. I see that every person needs to become an exquisite lover. And when I say lover, I don't just mean in bed. I also mean in all possible way that we can love each other, and whether it's in conversations, in emotional connection, in bed, in the ways that we dance, in other ways that our bodies engage together, in the ways that we're spiritually connected, in the ways that we show up in the world together within our community. I think these are all ways that we can love each other, and we can become better lovers. So exquisitelover.com.
Thank you so much. You have a beautiful day.
You too.